But what I found so amazing about this, put on the new self, is this fact. If God has to tell you to do something, it's obvious that you're not doing it, right? Does that make sense? So, in other words, if God tells you to love, it's evident that he's been looking down and keeping his eye on you, and you have not been walking in love, you have not been practicing love. Here he says, put on the new self. It must be obvious if he tells you to put on the new self, then something else is currently in its place. Look at somebody and say, the old self might still be there. Yes. If he says put on the new self, it's evident that the old self must still be there. I use this analogy that if signs are very important, signs point us in the right direction. It tells you where to go and how far you have to go to get to your goal. For example, if you're going to Dallas, it'll tell you, if you were reading the sign correctly, Dallas this way. It might say 30, 35 miles, right? But you would find it strange if your intent was to go to Dallas that you would follow signs saying go to Kansas City that way. Does that make sense? If your intent was to go to Dallas, you're not going to follow signs that say New York City or Kansas City that way. Of course, you're going to follow the signs that are pointing to Dallas. What am I saying? I'm saying that it is easy for one to say he is following Christ, but he is not following or doing the things that his Lord commanded. In other words, he is not following the signs that Jesus laid out, saying, if you're going to follow me, go this way. And they're following the things that are in the opposite direction. Doesn't that seem crazy? Why would you do that? But we do that all the time. So here Paul points out something. He says, if then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above where Christ is. Something else very important. Because if you don't get verse 1, you shouldn't even worry about anything else. It says, if then you have been raised with Christ. I instructed those who attended last week to go back into Romans 6, where Paul really begins to break down being baptized into Jesus Christ's death. And it can basically be paraphrased like this: a life for a life. What do you mean by that, teacher? A life for a life. That's what Paul was talking about, being baptized into Jesus' death. A life for a life. That is, in its simplicity, that an individual believes that Jesus Christ came down on this earth to teach the message of the gospel, right? To walk in a life that was righteous and holy, but also to go to the cross and to give his life as a ransom for the many, for you and I. But if you believe that, you also understand that what Jesus requires is that our reasonable act of service would be to give our lives back to God. In other words, you come to God